Hey guys, my guest tonight, Michael Gagliardi, says he survived more than 12 years of life living with his demonically possessed mother. And boy, does he have a story to tell. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. Happy Monday. Hope everybody had a great weekend. I know I had a pretty good weekend. It wasn't too bad. Not too bad. Very hot, though. We topped out at 108 yesterday. Incredible. Just a word of warning, you may hear a noise in here. I have my little old dog in here. He's 16 years old. He's a rat terrier, and he was having a hard time the last 3 days with the heat. I don't have any air conditioning out in my living room. So, I mean, he was really, really struggling the past 2 or 3 days. So I thought I'd make him a space in here because this is the room that has the AC, and I thought I'd make him a space in here, and he could come in here and lay down. And I brought him in here at about 2:30, 3 o'clock, and he's been sleeping really sound ever since. So he might wake up and you might hear him, moving around, or sometimes he'll cry out because he's old. He forgets where he's at. So sometimes he'll cry out. But don't stress, it's just him. It's just him. And if I happen to look over there like I'm doing right now, that's because I'm checking him out. Anyway, my name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We're 45 strong up and down the state, which means we can get to you no matter where you're at. Now, it might take us a while. People don't realize California's got everything. California's got mountains. We got deserts. We got oceans. We got the whole ballgame. Lots of farmland too. So that's why. If it depends on where you're located. If you're in the more rural part, it might take us a couple days to get there, but we will get there. I have sensitives on staff. Sensitives on staff who can phone you. And in the majority of the cases, they can calm things down until we can get out there and see exactly what's going on with you. Okay, so look us up. We're on Facebook under California Haunts in my name, and we're on TikTok under California Haunts. We're on Twitter under California Haunts. We're on Twitch under Cal Haunts, and Instagram you can find me under Ghosty Gal, and that's all lowercase. So that being said, yeah, welcome to tonight's show. It's going to be an interesting show. My guest tonight. What a story he has to tell. And I really admire him for going through what he did, but in coming out, a normal person because with the stuff he went through. So it's going to be an interesting night. Quick announcement, I'm going to be teaching a Psychic Development Class 1, and I'm going to be teaching a Psychic Development Class 2 coming up here. So the Psychic Development Class 1 is for basic psychic development, and I teach you how to open and close that door, that spiritual door. Because once you open it, anything and everything will come through. So part of what I teach is how to open and close that door. I also teach you how to step out of your body and go visit your spirit library. You can learn some stuff about yourself. You can visit your spirit animal and all that good stuff. So that'll be the first class. The second class is more advanced, where I teach about crystals and other stuff, and then we take it to a more advanced state of even working on different versions of psychic abilities like ESP and things like that. Okay, so that's going to be coming up. And Susan, if you're listening, see, I didn't forget. So that's going to be coming up, and I'll be announcing that tonight on the California Haunts Meetup. And you can check it out over there tomorrow morning. And sign up for that class, because if you think you might have psychic abilities, I can help you out. I can help you out with that. I'm self-taught. I'm a self-taught psychic. Okay, I grew up in a haunted house. I grew up with abilities, but I didn't have any help nurturing them, so I got to teach myself. Okay, well, my guest tonight, again, his name is Michael. I hope I got his name right. We know how I'm about names, right? Slap, slap, slap. Michael Gagliardi. I hope I'm right with it. He has a unique childhood and teen years to talk about. We always hear of these demonic possession stories, and it's always, a kid, like a woman or something that's possessed, or somebody's daughter is possessed, or like Emily Rose, right? Things like that. We never hear of somebody that has it for most of their life, that's possessed for most of their life. And Michael's mother was, I don't even know, Michael's mother, all that Michael tell you, sorry, I'm not going to screw this up. But Michael has a unique story to tell. So I'm going to bring him in, okay? Let's do this. Hello, sir.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing all right. We've got you beat here. It's 120 here in the Coachella
Whoa.
Valley.
Yikes. No, 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 no. I'm lucky because I have this dog in here and then I have an Australian Kelpie. But she grew up, learning how to be a working dog in the heat out just outside Bakersfield in Parkfield. So to her, being in there with no AC is nothing. I mean, she just lays down and she doesn't care. But I mean, it can get bad. 120? Oh yeah, oh yeah. I was in
Yeah.
Arizona one time. I flew into Arizona late one night, and I never even thought about it. Yeah, because I know it stays hot here. It'll go down to like that low 90s here at night. I walked out of that airport that I was going to die. So in a way, I envy you because it's eternal sunshine where you're at. Because I have friends that live down in that area. But on the other hand, I'm not a heat person. I have to. I gotta have my AC.
Well, it's a dry heat, so
There's a
uh,
difference too. There's a huge difference.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes we get the monsoon season coming in during August, and it can be 70% humidity and 118 degrees, which is just absolute misery. But not very often. It's pretty dry. We usually are around 7% humidity, so it's
Hmm.
extremely dry.
Oh yeah, that's nice. That's very nice. So tell me about you, sir.
Well, it's a long story. In fact, I've 45 years have passed by, come and gone, and I wouldn't even be talking about it if it weren't for COVID. COVID was kind of the thing that gave me the time to write my experiences, um, and in fact, when I was writing the book, it took me about I don't know, 9 months, 9 months to a year, somewhere in there, and I wrote it actually for my family, for my kids, because I've got 30-year-old girls. They're in their
Uh huh.
30s, and they've got kids, but they've got young kids, and we were never able to talk about it because when they were little, it's just not something you talk about to them. But when they became older, they had children of their own,
Hmm.
and it was hard to find time. So I said, you know what, you got little kids, we never have time. I'm just going to write a book. I'll write it wasn't really going to be a book. It was just I was going to write my memoirs, basically,
Right.
of growing up, and then you can read it whenever you want.
Right.
And as I was going through the process, um, my girls kept asking me, how's it going? How's the writing going? I said, yeah, it's going good. It's going good. I said, there's a lot to write down. In fact, the book, that when it finally came out, it's about 50% shorter than the
Mm.
actual. It was at 50% of it was edited out,
Wow.
and there's stuff that I didn't even put in because it was too disturbing,
Hmm.
too just disturbing, and there's stuff that even my wife to this day doesn't know because I just don't want to go there. But I they told me, my kids told me at one point when I was getting close to the end that I should put it out, because I had told them, I wish there was somebody that could have rescued me from my experience,
Hmm.
when I
Hmm.
was a kid.
Hmm.
I desperately wanted out, but you're a kid. What?
Right.
You have no power, you have no resources, you have nothing. You're stuck.
Right.
And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. And that weighed a lot on me, but it wasn't till I was in the middle of reading, writing the book. I think I was like 3/4 of the way done, maybe almost done. No, no, I was done. I was done. It was a couple of months after that because COVID went so long. I ended up watching a documentary series called Hostage to the Devil. And it was about Father Malachi Martin and his experiences. And I watched that, and I said to myself, wow, the producer who did that movie was, he didn't come across as a believer, or he
Hmm.
had this neutral persona about him, and he was compassionate about,
Hmm.
you know people's experiences. And I thought, hey, you know what? I'll just run it up the flagpole. I'll try and get a hold of him and see what he thinks. Because at this point, I really didn't want to go public with it because I didn't want the rejection, because it's so sensational. It's probably the craziest story anyone's ever going to hear. And, I just didn't want to get into that kettle, and having people contacting me. So, oh, you're doing it to sell books. And I couldn't care less about the books. I couldn't care less about that. I put it out there for the reasons I put it out there, mainly for my kids. But finally, I sent this guy named Marty Stalker, who was the producer for Hostage to the Devil, the documentary, and he lives in Belfast. And I sent him a quick email. Maybe 6 or 7 days, he got back to me and said, yeah, Michael, send me the manuscript. I thought, okay, I'll send him the manuscript. I thought I'll probably never hear from him again. That's fine, And I think I sent it to him on a Friday, and he contacted me on Monday, and he said, wow, Michael, that's, one of the craziest things I've ever heard in my life. And then, we began our relationship via the internet, and, we were talking back and forth, and he said, man, you got to go public with this, man, because there's so many people that, that don't believe in this stuff. And that was the whole reason why I didn't want to put it out there in the first place, because it is so sensational, and I didn't want people, I just didn't want the attention. That's all. I'm not a person that wants attention.
Right.
So after talking to him, I kind of cemented the deal, and then I went public with it. And the easiest thing I could do was just to upload it to Amazon, as a digital book. So that's what I did. I never made any books. I never made soft copies or hard copies or anything like that, because I just didn't care. I was like, that part of my life is over, and I'm tired, but as I got my first interview and started talking about it, and then people started coming out of the woodwork, and they were getting a hold of me and being very compassionate, with me, and having, I'm not going to say similar stories, but a lot of people were contacting me and saying, yeah, I totally believe you. I totally believe you. And that in itself was a therapy, because, nothing was ever brought up even in my town where it happened. I mean, it happened in a small Canadian town in Northern Ontario. And it was kind of hidden and suppressed by the authorities and the hospital and the mental institution and all this kind of stuff. And, so I really never gave it any value. And it wasn't until I was, probably in my 20s where I started falling apart, as a human being, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And I had no idea that I was suffering from severe PTSD. I mean, I didn't go through puberty till I was 21. Wow. I mean, that's like, because it changed my body chemistry so terribly bad from this long exposure to traumatic events, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. It took me a long time to figure out, because I thought that what I went through, I knew it wasn't normal, but I didn't think that it was, as crazy, because I was a kid. Right. When you're a kid, you suppress things. It's not as bad as you think it is. But I had all these problems, all these mental and emotional problems. I couldn't even talk on the phone. I was so socially inept, and even to this day, I still, I don't like loud, I don't like crowds. I don't like getting together with, massive amounts of people. And, I'm not going to say I'm socially much better, but, even to this day, I have severe PTSD. And I'm going to comment on your comment that you said that I came out pretty normal. Well, it seems like that on the outside,
Okay.
but and I think I had an interview with George Norrie last week, and he said, "Well, it sounds like you've come up pretty normal." That's far from the truth. I mean, it may seem like that on the outside, but just like a child, I learned to deal with it. I mean, we all have to live in this world. We all have to make money. I didn't want to be this poster child for welfare.
Right. Right.
I wanted to do things on my own, and but still, it's extremely difficult for me to wake up in the morning to go to sleep at night.
It's understandable. I mean, as a ghost hunter for 19 years, we go out to somebody's house and maybe it's something bad that's happening, and we're able to do a cleansing, and then we have to turn around to them and go, now you're not supposed to think about this ever again because you might draw it back in. But that's just human nature. It's human nature to look at the corner wherever this thing was and think, oh, I wonder if it's still lurking around or whatever. So I can understand you. On the outside, you're this, and on the inside, you've still got all those memories, and there's a lot of hurt there. And there's certain triggers that you're going to run into throughout the day and whatnot that bring memories back.
Yeah, I mean, my PTSD is so bad that it affects me every day.
Mm-hmm.
3, 4 times during the day, my face starts to go numb, and by nighttime, when my medication wears out, my face goes really numb, feels like pins and needles, and then I start shaking really, really bad inside. Until my medication knocks me out, and then I wake up in the morning with my face like pins and needles, severe pain, and that's what wakes me up in the morning. Is this facial paralysis kind of with all these numbing needles and pains and stuff like that. But and then once my day begins, once the meds start kicking in, helping,
Right.
giving me a window of opportunity to be alive and be somewhat normal, I can carry on pretty normal stuff. I just have to keep the stress really low,
Mm-hmm.
because I pass out. My body can't take that. And like I said, the PTSD has morphed over the years from my 20s
Mm-hmm.
to my 30s to my 40s, and now in my 50s. It's taken on this thing where I just can't deal with stress. I'll pass out. I'll just fall down and my system just shuts off, and I'll fall down. I've hit my head several times, and it always happens late at night,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just one of the results of prolonged exposure to severe terror and trauma. I think
And
probably by now everybody wants to know what happened, right?
exactly, how old were you when you realized something was wrong with your mother?
Well, we were living in Mississauga at the time, which is
Mm-hmm.
a borough in Canada. We have boroughs, in Toronto, just like they do in New York City, and
Right,
the
New Orleans, yeah.
Bronx, Queens, all that kind of stuff. Mississauga was one of them, and I was about 3 years old, 3.5 years old, and really the beginning of it was, I remember, going to the table. My mother would call me to the table, for lunch as a kid, and I would always have this like star soup, that because we're Italian, and Italian kids always get this, it's like a pasta fazola, like star soup, for American children, or alphabet soup, whatever.
Sure.
And I came to the table and it wasn't there, and she came up behind me and dumped the whole pot, scalding hot, all down my shoulder.
Wow.
And then, she called a taxi. We went to the doctors. She never consoled me. She never said a word. And I remember the trip there. I don't remember the doctor appointment,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember going home. And that's when I had this. That was the beginning of me being very hyper vigilant about my mother, looking at her a different way. She never
Mm-hmm.
comforted me. She never touched me, never held me. She was this woman who was completely aloof. I existed, but she was like, I'm not going to say in a trance at that point,
Right.
but just existing, and I was basically orbiting around her, in her space, and
Mm-hmm.
she somewhat took care of me. But by the time we ended up moving, about 120 miles away to this very isolated little town called Meaford, Ontario, Canada, up by Georgian Bay, was about 120 miles away from Toronto. So we were living in Toronto. My dad was working in Toronto. And then all of a sudden we move 120 miles away. And then my dad drives all the way back down to Toronto to stay there during the week to work, and then comes back on the weekend. And then from there, I started kindergarten, and then things just started to escalate from there. She began, talking to herself. It began very, very slowly. She began talking to herself, and and this would go on all day.
Mm-hmm.
She was talking to herself, whistling to herself, in trance-like states, just like, hey, is everybody there? Kind of deal, and she became very disconnected. Well, disconnected ever since I can remember. I don't remember ever having a conversation with her, and that sounds bizarre, but it's
Right.
true. And as the years started going on, it became more darker. She began, speaking in different voices, very manly voices, arguing voices back and forth in different languages, and stomping around the house, slamming doors, screaming for no apparent reason. And this went on. It went on every waking minute, and I don't remember it ever being any different until it started getting worse. And then one day when I was at school, I think maybe I was in 5th grade, and this is where everything kind of took a turn for the worst. Somebody knocked on our homeroom door, and there was a policeman there, a couple of people of authority,
Mm-hmm.
and they motioned me to come outside the classroom. So I got outside the classroom, and the police officer said, your neighbor is going to drive you home. So I get in the car with my neighbor, and we're driving, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm probably 5th grade, and 4th grade, something like that. And he goes, well, there's been an incident, and he said your mother tried to kill your sister with a butcher knife.
Wow.
And I wasn't very shocked by that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But once I got home, apparently they had taken my mother. The mental institution had been there. The police were there. They put her in a straitjacket and they took her away. And then what I heard from my sister later on is that my mother was in the kitchen, my sister was in the living room. And because that morning I forgot to, we have mud rooms in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
They're just little lobbies where you take your shoes off. It's a room before you enter the house. So, the slush and all that stuff stays in that room and doesn't come into the living room. I had left the doors open to the mud room and the door outside. And my sister told me if I had not left those open, that she wouldn't be around today, because she came from the kitchen, came running after with a knife, and she said that she was a witch, and that they told her she's got to die. So that was the incident. That, wow, okay. And my neighbors in the neighborhood, they all witnessed it, because she was chasing her around our car with a butcher knife trying to kill her. So that's how all that started. And then, of course, they took her away. They took her to a local mental institution. And then 3 months later, they bring her back. They release her. And we're like, how can they possibly release her? She tried to commit murder of minors in the house, and now they're bringing her back. How is that possible? So my sister, who was already living for years in her room with a padlock on her door, I slept with, this had been going on for years. I slept with my armoire, my big dresser drawer,
Right.
and I took all my clothes out and I weighted it down with bricks. And then every night I would press it up against the door and then sleep with a hockey stick in a fetal position in my room. And, I'd stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning just waiting, because she always tried to get in my room every night. She'd shake the door, to see if she could get in, but and she'd find that, the dresser was up against, she couldn't get in, So, that was already going on for years, that we were living like that. And it got so bad my sister, she couldn't take it anymore. When she found out she was coming home, she left and moved 100 back down to Toronto to stay with my grandmother. So I'm the only one left in the house. So
Wow.
now when she comes back, things are getting really bad. She is 10 times worse now than she was when she left. So I don't know what happened at the mental institution, but when I was doing research for my book, I actually called the mental institution there, which is now a department of the hospital there in Owen Sound. And I called them and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for records for, this woman." And I gave her my mother's name. And they said, "Okay, sure. It's like $35." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." And she goes, "Well, what date are we looking at?" And I said, "Oh, it would have been, mid 70s to early 80s. Oh, we don't keep that information. All that stuff gets burned." And she goes, "Oh, just for giggles, let me just take a look. What's her name?" And I'm hearing her, clacking away.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, "That's odd. Her records are archived off campus." So I said to them, "Okay, can you call me back when you get those records?" She says, "Yeah, I'll have them within a couple of days, and then I'll send them to you." So a couple of days go by, a week goes by, and I don't hear her. And I call back, and I forgot to take down the lady's name,
Mm-hmm.
but I got somebody else and in archives. And I asked for those records, and oh no, they don't exist. They don't exist. And I said, "Well, I just talked to a lady that said they're archived off." "Oh, no, well, she was wrong. Who was that lady?" And I said, "Well, I don't remember." So, that was odd. But getting back to, when she came back after the first incident, when she had come back, like I said, she was 10 times worse. She was eating everything in the house. She became morbidly obese, and she was only 4'11". She was a very short woman. And she was eating everything in the house like an animal. So much so that, I was starving. So I started stealing food from gardens and kids' lunches at school, and they never caught me. But I did that for quite a number of years. And we had to put my dad, whatever food we did have, we kept in a freezer downstairs because we had a basement. And my dad would put a big thick chain on the freezer, and with a lock on it. So one day I was coming home. I'm paraphrasing and shortening up the story, but
Sure, no problem. Yeah,
I mean, there's horrible things going on 12 hours a day, and at night it's that screaming and banging in the house and knocking and scratching and things flying around the room and her room smashing. And I mean, this is what's going on, but for sake of time,
right.
I'm at this point, I'm about 16 years old, and I'm coming home. It was in the summer, and we have there's two ways into our basement, one from outside and one from inside. And I come home, get off my bike, go downstairs into the basement, and I see her with a hacksaw trying to cut the chain off the freezer. And the only thing I could think of was yell, "Hey." And when I yelled "hey" to her, she was still bent over, and she just looked at me through her hair. Her hair was, down to here, her bangs, she was very, very unkempt. And she just growled at me. And, she growled at me in a voice that was not her own, which really tripped me out. And she threw down the hacksaw and then ran upstairs. And I ran after her, but she beat me up the stairs. And once again, I told you she was morbidly obese and like 4'11". Normally she walked very slow. It was, more like a waddle, than walking. But she beat me up the stairs, and she went into her room and slammed the door. And, I don't know how to explain it, but by that time in my life, I was losing my mind being there. I mean, I was, inviting myself over to other kids' houses to stay the night. When it was warm outside, sometimes I would sleep in the park because I just didn't want to go home. I was terrified. I mean, it was mental abuse to the power of 10,
Right.
and I just couldn't take it. I mean, soon my mother would be, just let me give you her daily routine at this time. During the daytime, she would sit in this chair that she actually bottomed out because she was so morbidly obese. She rank like you wouldn't believe. She smelled so terribly bad. All her teeth were broken, even her molars. All her molars, every one of her teeth were broken. She was only 46 years old. And I would walk by her and she would wag her tongue at me and go, like this at me with this like mute voice. And I could see her tongue. It was all chewed up on both sides. It was all like a bread knife, like all serrated, whether she was chewing it on her broken teeth. I don't know, but she never complained about any of this, and she would be sitting in this chair, singing, laughing, screaming, going from voice to voice, changing back and forth, and then answering herself with a different voice, like within a split second. And then she was hitting herself with a log across the chest until she was bloody. And sometimes I would leave the house. She'd be hitting herself. I'd leave in the morning and I'd come in the driveway. The windows would be open of the house. And I'd come in the driveway and I could hear the pounding from outside from her hitting herself in her chest. And I would come inside and there she was hitting herself in the chest and drop deading her leg. She would lift her leg up and drop dead it, and then lift it up and drop dead it while she was hitting herself, and then go, and talking and talking and talking, with all these crazy voices and I was losing my mind at that point. I was beginning to fail school, and I was really having a hard time, functioning. And I had no clue that, I was just a kid. I grew up in this,
Right.
I had no idea it was wrong. I mean, nobody, the neighbors, they called the police 100 times on her because she would go to their houses, knock on their doors. And then when they came to the door, she'd go, I'm going to cut your head off, and then they'd, she'd walk away. And this happened all the time. The police were at our house all the time, and nothing ever happened except when they tried to kill her. So, or when she tried to kill my sister. But let me go back to the story with, when I chased her up the stairs after, she had the hacksaw. This was the defining moment for me. I chased her. She got into her room. She closed the door. She was pressing on the door so hard that the door bowed up. It was all bowed out right to me. It was bowed out. And I was like, and I could hear her growling behind the door. She was growling behind the door. And I tried to move the doorknob, and I don't know how to explain this, but I was drawn to this. I was like, at that point, I was contemplating either killing her or she was going to kill me. That's what I thought my reality was as a teenager at that time. This is what's going to happen to me. It's going to be me or it's going to be her. So I wanted to end it right there. And I don't know why that was that it happened at that moment, because I was terrified, but it sucked me into it. So she's holding the doorknob and I'm hearing her breathing and growling, and that the door's all bowed up, and I'm trying to move the doorknob and I can't move the doorknob. So I just stand there and I wait for a second and I kind of wring my hands like this. And then all of a sudden the bow in the door goes back. And then I grab the doorknob and I notice that it's loose. So I whip open the door and I see her standing there. And just for this split second, we're looking eye to eye, maybe 2 feet apart. And her eyes are just like black marbles. There's no pupil. There's no nothing. And and that sounds just so stupid and cliche, like a stupid movie. But that's exactly how it was. I can't explain it any other way, is that they were just like black marbles. And she growled at me in this voice, and then she lunged at me. And when she lunged at me, I went tearing down the hallway and out the door. And then I heard her go back into her room and slam the door so hard that all the windows, like, they shuddered really hard. And I'm out on the driveway and I'm going, and by this time I'm in absolute trauma. I can't even say one word. I was trying to say just any word, and I couldn't find a word, and I couldn't say it.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to compose myself at this time. And I knew that I think it was a Saturday because my father was in town. So I knew where he was. So I reached in the doorway and I got the phone, because the phone we had right inside the mudroom. As soon as you walk in, it was right there and had a long cord on it. So I grabbed that and I took it outside, and I was trying, it was dial up back then,
Right.
and I was so shaking so bad I couldn't dial the phone. It took me like 10 minutes to dial the correct number, because you just get one wrong and the whole thing's screwed up, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And it took me quite a while. And then my father's girlfriend answered the phone, and I was like, and she recognized my voice, but I still couldn't say a word. So my dad came on the phone really quick. I could hear her yelling, Emmanuel, because it was my father's name. And my dad gets on the phone, and I'm still, and he says, okay, I'm coming right over. We live in a small town, so he's like a half a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
So within a couple of minutes, he's there, and he comes in the driveway, and I'm trying to explain it, but I still can't say anything. I couldn't put a sentence together. So my dad starts walking into the house, and he opens the door, and then he opens the mudroom door to the living room. The second he steps inside, she's there, grabs him. My dad's 5'8", 5'8", and at the time he was probably 170 pounds, 5'8", 170 pounds, 160 pounds, somewhere there. She throws him to the ground and begins scraping his face all up and growling and yelling and screaming and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just watching in terror, because she threw my dad to the ground. She's only 4'11", and my dad manages to get up and he runs outside. And then I'm right behind him. I ran outside, and then my mom slams the door again with such force that all the windows again begin to shudder back and forth. Like I thought they were going to pulsate and smash and break. It was with such force. So we're standing in the driveway. My dad, that's the first time in my life I saw him traumatized. We never said a word. And for a couple of minutes, he gained his composure, and then he went inside and he called the police. And then within, 10, 15 minutes, the police and the mental institution people were there, the proverbial in the 1970s and 80s, guys in the white coats.
Yeah.
They all show up, and then they go inside. And they take my mother and put her in a straitjacket, and then she's gone again. And they take her away, And the very interesting thing about this is my dad and I never talked about that incident, and we still haven't to this day, which is really weird. And even weirder is the fact that 3 months later, they sent her back home.
Wow. Now, did you ever find out how she became possessed or anything like that? Was she messing with dark stuff, or what was going on?
Yes, she was. Before I was born, her father died in a terrible accident. From what I'm told, my mother adored my father, or her father. Mm-hmm. And his name was Michele, which is Michael in Italian. And that's how I got my name. I was named after my grandfather. So my mother just adored him, and he died a terrible accident. From what I understand, he was, drunk one night and, crossing railroad tracks, fell down, the train came over, cut his legs off, and he hemorrhaged to death. And, where we come from in Toronto, back in those days, the train go right through your backyard. There's no fences, there's no nothing, it's just, common sense. Don't stand in front of the train,
right.
So back in those days, that's how it was. Apparently, so that's how he died. And my mother was so heartbroken that her sister, who was younger, was involved in occultism. And I remember as a child being in my bedroom and listening to them talking, at the dining room table, whatever, talking about seances. I never knew what that meant. It took me, a couple decades before I recalled that. I go, oh my gosh, I remember them talking about that. But my mother's sister, who is my aunt, was definitely involved in the occult. And I believe, it was during the 70s. I believe that they did a seance because my mother missed her father so incredibly much. And so did my grandmother. My grandmother was so heartbroken. Apparently he was just a really terrific guy, and they were heartbroken, and I think they tried to open a door to, communicate with their father, would have been their father. And I think that's where the doorway was let in, because from my timeline, from talking to other people, in my family, that is around the time that things started to get weird, that she became very isolated. It started very, 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 very quietly. She became isolated, didn't talk a whole lot, didn't go out with her friends, didn't do things, and then isolation from the family. And then she began to hear voices and began to see things. She was always hearing voices telling her to do things, wicked things, and then it just progressed to where it was at, But interesting thing though, the first time when I left Canada as a 19-year-old, and the thing was over, I left. My mother had died. Actually, the day that I left, I went to California. My first time returning, some 16, 17 years later, I found out that my mother's sister, her daughter, which was my cousin, who, we would pal around when we were very little, when we lived in Toronto, she ended up hanging herself in the basement, and she had 3 kids. And she was part of the family that delved in occultism. So, there was definitely, wicked ties in both sides of the family, that were, disturbing and destroying the family unit. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, so go ahead.
But a little bit about your father, a little bit in his background too, because obviously they were madly in love at one point. For her to have you and your sister. So how did he react when all this started to go down?
Well, my father, he grew up in the war. He was a refugee when he was little. He saw the fascists trying to shoot his father as they were running across, because he's from Italy, and they blew up his house. They blew up the family donkey, and all the guts went on all the kids because they were trying to hide from the Nazis. He's got his own PTSD, and my dad was an absentee father for all of my childhood. He was gone. He was either working in Toronto, like I said, we moved to this small town, and then he'd sleep in his truck and live down in Toronto for 5-6 days and come up on the weekend and then leave again. So I never saw him. We never even had a relationship old time growing up. We spoke a handful of words in a year, Okay. So, and my dad, he doesn't speak English very well. Yeah. And, and I've talked to some of my cousins, and, the Italian generation from that time, from World War II, they don't talk about anything. Right. Everything's great in life, no matter how bad it is, everything's good, fine, and nobody talks about anything that's bad. Everything's all positive and great. That was that generation,
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just weird, But I love my father.
Absolutely. Now you were dealing. I'm not laughing. I'm saying you were dealing with this by night, and then you'd have to go to school the next day. How were you in school as far as talking to your teachers? There was no one to talk to?
Well, I didn't talk to anybody because I didn't think there was anything wrong.
Okay.
If nobody at home was saying it was wrong, why should anybody at school think it's wrong? Other than the fact that, neighbors were witnessing, attempted murder, right. And hearing her screaming and going up and I mean, if somebody knocked on somebody's door and told them they were going to cut their head off, what does that look like in America in 2023? I
Exactly. Yeah.
mean, cops are there, you're in cuffs, and you're gone for a psychic evaluation, right?
Right.
This happened all the time. The local authorities never did anything. They came over, they interviewed us like they always did. They sat us down in all different rooms and they interviewed us. And then they came to zero conclusion and went home. I mean, she lit the house on fire probably 7 times. The fire department was there because our house was on fire all the time. I mean, this kind of stuff, it went on. The neighbors could hear her screaming, and she'd knock on their doors. I mean, if no one else thought nothing was wrong, why would I think so?
Right. Right, exactly.
I never said nothing at school. There was only one time in 10th grade when my homeroom teacher asked if everything that was at home was okay. And that's because in my 10th grade, like I told you, that was right around the time that I started losing my mind and I didn't know what to do anymore. That I was skipping school and, just going places. I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't focus. So, I couldn't focus on anything, let alone school. So I was signing my own notes at school. I'd bring a note in, Michael's absent because he was sick. And then I signed my own name on it. And, after 10 or 12 times, this kind of got suspicious, I guess. And then my homeroom teacher asked me, and I'll give you the dialogue because I remember it clearly. She said, "Michael, is everything at home okay?" And I said, "Fine." And she said, "Okay." And that was the end of it. That was the only probe into my childhood. That was the only probe. I mean, I talked to CPS and, they pulled me aside and they basically told me to run away, because I don't know what they think they were dealing with. I mean, after somebody's witnessed, a mother is trying to, kill her children and you witnessed it. How does CPS bring that mother back into the home?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all. It makes less sense to me now, but
were there times when she was nice at all, or was she just always like
no?
This?
I never knew her. I never knew her being the nurturing mother. Like, for instance, I'm watching Sesame Street and she comes over to me, "Hi, honey. I love you. You're such a sweet little boy." Kiss on the cheek. I never even knew she knew I existed. I was just like a piece of furniture, and in the very beginning, yeah, she fed me some things, but by the time I was 5 years old, all that ended. I was doing my own laundry at 6 years old. 7 years old, I was washing my own clothes, hanging them up on the line, stealing my own food. I had been doing that for so long, I didn't even know what else to do. I was so good at it, And there was only 2 lucid moments when I was in my teens and when my sister left. There was 2 lucid moments that I remember, and I say this on every interview because they're the only 2 times I can remember hearing my mother's normal voice, which was, a part when the police would be interviewing her and I could hear her from another way, and she was talking to them like everything was completely normal. When I was walking by, when she was doing her, she 2 times, and they were probably maybe a year apart from each other. She said to me, as I was walking across, in her normal speaking voice, "They're running up the back of my spine and perching in my head." And then as soon as she finished the word head, she'd go back into these voices and arguing back and forth, and then screaming and then whistling and singing hymns and songs. And so she said that to me twice over 2, like I said, about a year, two times where she said the exact same thing,
So whatever this is that had her was smart smart enough to fake out the cops and fake out CPS.
Well, yeah. I mean, there obviously was many of them. Like we see in the Bible, we see legions of demons. There's usually more than one, and the evidence of this was that she was she was talking in so many voices, and she was arguing with herself. And she'd go for, I could hear the different voices. Like after my sister left, it escalated 10 times worse. I don't know. I do know what made it worse, but it's like when she went away for the second time and came back, it's like what the Bible says about, once a demon has been kicked out, they go around, they wander arid places, and they go, I'm going to return to the house that I left. And then they found it swept and in order, and they bring back 7 more worse than themselves. And that's exactly what happened to her. She was off the charts, and I was losing my mind. And I thought at one point I was devising a way to kill her, because it was going to be me or her. And, I didn't know. I always had the sense of value in my life that I had no value. So why would anybody care? Why would anybody care at school? Why would anybody? I had no value. Nobody fed me. Nobody clothed me. Nobody took care of me. So you get this feeling. You don't have to have people tell you you're not of value. It's actions that speak louder than words, and I had no value. My sister lived her life locked in her room with a padlock, with a great big padlock, and she'd just come out, zip into the kitchen, grab food, and go back and then lock herself in again. I never saw her. I mean, I grew up with her, but I never saw her. It's bizarre. I know I think about it now, and I'm thinking about, man, if I heard somebody telling this story, I'd be like, that is bonkers. But it's exactly what happened, and 10 times more. There were so many disturbing things that I just,
How did you guys, how were you able to afford to buy food and stuff?
Well, we lived in Canada, and we lived in the Niagara Fruit Belt. So, my dad was a fisherman, so we caught a lot of fish. We never went to the grocery store. Maybe once every 3 months. Okay. My dad would go to the grocery store. I mean, that was just few and far between, but, we canned, my father canned our garden food. And during the summer, I took vegetables out of the garden. That's interesting because I'm a vegetarian to this day, and I eat a lot of raw vegetables, just like when I was a kid. And believe it or not, I have no cavities. I'm 56 years old. I have no cavities, which is weird.
Very lucky.
Yeah. And I mean, when I was a kid, I invited myself over to friends' houses so I could, eat lunch. As long as I could get one meal in me, I was good to go, and that's how I thrived. And in Canada, there's food everywhere. I used to tell my wife this. I said, you go out on the freeway, and there's several hundred miles of fence line with wild grapes along, and there's apple trees and wild pears and wild cherries and peaches and, all kinds of food, and raspberries and wild gooseberries. And I would go to the river and eat sumac and, whatever berries and apples. I ate a ton of apples because they were everywhere, because we grew up in orchard country, right. But that's how I survived, and stealing,
When you did that, as you talked earlier about, starting to write the book and doing research, was there anything in your research that really surprised you?
Yeah, the one thing that surprised me the most was, but this was after I wrote the book, is I started to delve into a lot of exorcisms, stuff that I could get my hands on, where people were actually demon possessed. And I'm not talking about internet stuff. I'm talking about real documented cases where so many people knew about it, and it was overwhelming. The evidence was overwhelming. And one of the cases that really struck me, well, they all struck me. Were all similar to my mother's. But the one that really struck me was the Annalise Michel case. And when I heard all the tapes, I think there's about 13 tapes, 13 hours of tapes to listen to. There's really 67 of them, but there's about 13 that are, for public consumption. The transcripts of the demonic entities that are speaking, they said the same things my mother said. I heard the same phrases, I heard the same gait in the speech patterns. You know, that's another thing, that because I couldn't understand what my mother was saying a lot of the time, you know, it made me so like, I got so frustrated that I began to learn languages on my own, you know. So I know a little, you know, you could dump me off in Germany, France, Italy. Uh, uh, I know some Arabic, you know, and I can pick up these languages, you know, because of the experience I had, because I was so tired of not understanding what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But once I heard those tapes, I heard speech patterns. I heard, I'm not going to say dialects, but
Mm-hmm.
there's nuances that were so familiar. And I heard sentences that were exactly the same, you know, and it was mind boggling because the same hatred and, disdain for human life that you know were coming out of the mouth of Annalise Michel were the same kind of things that were coming out of my mother. Just absolute disdain and hatred, you know. And it was probably the case that really opened my eyes to, oh my gosh, the amount of things that I could, like, you know, my mother's case, this case, and draw lines across, you know. Yep, 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 was kind of mind-boggling. And that kind of really threw me for a loop because, you know, once I had left Canada, I left Canada at 19 years old, and I came to the United States homeless, and I came to the Santa Monica Pier, and I was homeless on the Santa Monica Pier. I just had to get away. Like I told you, I was losing my mind, but um, it wasn't until I did that I was free from all that, but it morphed into something worse. And that's why I had to write the book Devil Take the Hindmost Part 2, is because my journey through what happened to me had just begun. It just begun. Now I was beginning to have nightmares.
Mm-hmm.
I had night terrors. I was shaking, waking up in cold sweats, and here my PTSD began now. Now, as
Right.
soon as you're out of the fire and you feel you're safe, that's when your body relaxes, and then that's when you have to deal with it, because now it starts to react. All the years I grew up to in it, I never had the chance to react. It was always impulse reaction, you know. That's why you hear all these stories about these children getting molested by priests, and, you know, why are you coming out when you're 40? You know,
Right.
it's because at 40 something triggered them, and now they're falling apart, you know. And because that stuff, you know, long periods of traumatic stress, you know, it gets buried in you, and you have to deal with it sooner or later. You can't pretend it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just can't. You can't pretend, you know. So it surfaces, and it surfaces in very strange ways. And like I said, my PTSD from my 20s to my 30s to my 40s to now my 50s has morphed into all kinds of different things. I went through depression for 10 or 12 years. I was on suicide watch, you know, and then it morphed into manic depression. Well, I was like, hey, what's going on? What's going on? You know, when I was in my 20s, it was manic. You know, I was extremely manic. I was like the guy on A Beautiful Mind. You know,
Right.
I was recording license plates and colors and walking into a room and knowing who was, you know, immediately who was a threat to me and positioning myself accordingly. You know, stuff like that. I never even thought about it. I would just do, you know, instantly do it because of the situation I grew up in. You know, I was like a Spartan. You know, I grew up like a Spartan. You know, I froze in the wintertime because I didn't have clothes that fit me. You know, I never had boots that fit me, you know, jackets that fit me. You know, I never had enough food. I was always starving and hungry and you know, stealing and you know, and I regret some of the things I did to survive, you know, but I didn't know any better, you know.
Right. Right. Right.
You
What did
know,
what did she die of? Or how did she pass?
well, like I told you, she ate like an animal.
Mm-hmm.
She was 46 years old, and she died of atherosclerosis, which is the hardening of the arteries.
Okay.
So basically, she died from overeating.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And she died on the day that I left the country.
Wow.
because I had been in Canada for, I think it was 7 or 8 days. And I left my phone number with a cousin, and
Mm-hmm.
they ended up tracking me down, and they said, yeah, your mother passed away, and I wasn't surprised at all. But
Mm-hmm.
she said that, she was decomposing, and the neighbors could smell this horrible odor. And that's how they found her. And they said, yeah, she probably died on this day.
Right.
So it was the day that I left. So it was kind of
Wow.
like a proverbial, prophetic wringing of the hands. The
Yes.
work is done here, you know.
But you've made a good life for yourself. I mean, despite the PTSD and everything, you're doing really well.
Yeah, yeah. I've eked out a career for myself in music. I'm a jazz and flamenco guitar player. I play my own music, and I probably do about, you know, post pre-COVID, I was doing about 180 performances a year,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm almost at that level now again at post-COVID. But yeah, it's the only thing I can do because I go play for 2 hours, I pack up my stuff, and I leave.
Mm-hmm.
It's as simple as that. I cannot maintain like a 9 to 5 job.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried it and I just can't do it. I just can't do it. And now in my 50s, my PTSD has morphed, and it's getting, I'm losing the battle, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. I mean, I'm really tired. I'm really tired. I'm really worn out. And the shaking, comes and goes throughout the daytime as well. And, I have a lot of nervous anxiety where I got to get away, and you can't do that at work,
Mm-hmm.
but, the therapy, that's the thing that drew me to music, was the therapy of playing.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I'm playing, I don't think about those things. It is therapy. You're
Right.
engaged with your mind and your hands and your feet, and you know and I play rather complicated music, so it's it's kept me alive, and made me able to sustain a living for myself. So
Understood. Let me ask you this real quick before I send you off. When you started to get this PTSD and you went to psychologists and you were able to tell them what you went through, did they believe you at first?
well, I probably went to 7 or 8 of them, and
Mm-hmm.
once I told them, like, the very first session,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so what's on your mind? Okay, so this is what happened to me. I had a number of them that just put their hand up and said, I can't help you. I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy. And I expected that. And out of everybody that I've been to, because I've gone to, several, not one of them has been able to deal with what I've told them,
Mm-hmm.
the disturbing things that I've witnessed, and they weren't able to help. I mean, some of them gave me, the fashionable, yeah, well, you should, well, you've already wrote a book. That was therapy. Write a letter to your mother and stuff like that. I'm like, you know what? This is way beyond this.
Mm-hmm.
Writing a letter to my mother is not going to help me. In fact, one guy said, you know what? I've got a psychiatrist who dealt with POWs from
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam who killed children and mothers and stuff like that. He says, I'm going to send you to them. And he was like, sorry, not my, that's somebody else's hat to wear, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So yeah, there's nobody that has been able to offer me anything that was actually useful, you
Right.
know, other than, being a Christian and my trust and hope in Jesus. I mean, that's the only thing that's given me peace. And Jesus says, peace I give unto you, not like the world gives, give I unto you. And that's the peace that I've received. That's why I'm able to talk about this. I have shut my mouth for 45 years. I never talked about this because I never thought anybody would believe me. Because
Right.
once I started to recall, what happened to me, and my God, what's wrong with me? That's how it all started. It all started with, what's wrong with me? I can't talk on the phone. I'm socially inept. I can't function. You know, once I started delving into what really happened and started talking about it and writing it down, and I'm able to see, oh my God, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was able to understand myself better. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Sure it is.
why I do what I do,
Mm-hmm.
because I had friends that think, man, that guy's kind of out there a little bit, or, that kind of thing. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Because I have completely different views about things than most people, because my childhood, parameter
Mm-hmm.
is so incredibly different, than others. I mean, I've got no Christmas stories. I've got no birthday stories.
Right.
I have no normal childhood stories to tell, other than funny stuff that happened at school, which I actually wrote a book about,
Mm-hmm.
because there were some funny things that happened to me and I wanted to not focus on all the horrible
Sure.
stuff, But yeah, it's been quite a journey. And the greatest thing that's happened to me, other than, Christ giving me peace and all this, is that my wife has stayed with me for 36 years.
That's
And
great.
she has seen me go through suicide attempts, lockdown at Loma Linda. I mean, she saw me completely unravel, where I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just have no grasp of life, And she stood with me and helped me put all the pieces and build a new life. And it was not easy. It was not easy for me, and it was not easy for her.
Mm-hmm.
And she stuck by me through it all. And I've really got to give her a trophy,
Good.
and we're still together to this day. We'll be on 37 years now.
Wow, that's terrific.
Yeah,
That's
2
terrific.
kids and 6 grandchildren.
Wow. So what's next for you?
Well, I've been telling my story a lot, and I said for a long time, I'm not going to be the poster child for some, you know, charity, do-gooder thing. You think you had a bad story, you should hear this guy, motivational speaker kind of guy.
Right.
I always said I won't be the poster child for that, but my heart has since softened, and now that I'm talking about it, a lot of people call me and want to do interviews
Mm-hmm.
and things, and I'm very glad to be able to speak about these things now. And I've done a lot of research on my own about a lot of these kind of things, and
Mm-hmm.
the spiritual realm, and how to decipher what's us, what's the devil, and what's God.
Right. 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 Right.
And continue my music, which is, like I said, one of the greatest therapies for me. I probably play 4 or 5 times a week, which keeps me moving around, and I get to see nice places, meet great people, and make enough money to stay alive. So I'm content. So I'm staying the course.
That's cool. How can people find you?
Well, the book is on Amazon. Like I said, I never. It's just a digital download
Mm-hmm.
on Amazon. The both books. I've got a couple other books I've written that are kind of in editing right now. That kind of COVID helped me, kind of fired me up about writing. That, wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's another outlet other than
Sure.
music.
Absolutely.
So I got a couple of books out, and if anybody wants to write me or say hi, I'm always up for somebody calling me and saying, hey, I got compassion for you, brother, or something like that, because that is therapy, just having people believe me.
Mm-hmm.
Because while I was going through this, it was so suppressed, and it was as if nobody I had no value,
Mm-hmm.
and no one wanted to help me, that I wasn't worth saving, I wasn't worth rescuing. So that's part of my therapy. I mean, I do get the odd person that says, oh yeah, you're full of crap and all this. And I'm like, what? Yeah, whatever. I've got the PTSD to prove it.
Right. Right.
I've got the medical records to prove it, so, but yeah, if somebody wants to throw me a line at eventsmgagliardi@gmail.com and say hi, that's great. If somebody
Okay.
wants to hire me for music, that's great too. I, I,
Okay.
I I travel anywhere, so
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling your story. I appreciate it.
thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank
All
you.
right, sir. Well, you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, that was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I heard him on Coast to Coast, and that's where I found him. And it's an incredible story. You have to read the book. I've read the first book. It's an excellent book. It'll open up your eyeballs, so to say. Tomorrow I'll be back with Karen Clark at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, the usual time. And I do have a pain management appointment tomorrow morning, so we'll be talking about that. Plus, we're going to be talking about grief, because I know I've lost people. Karen's lost people. Everybody's lost people, right? So we're going to be talking about the stages of grief and how people can get through it. And that'll be tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We are equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. Please show me some love, some hearts, thumbs up, happy faces. Keep me up in that algorithm on Facebook. And hopefully tomorrow I will be out of YouTube jail. I thought I'd be out today, but not yet. So I'm just waiting. Anyway, I'll see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great evening.